Johnny Depp, Narcissist or Empath? Part 15. Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor. Let us continue our examination of the evidence to make a determination as to what Johnny Depp is. We continue to look at the issue of his involvement with alcohol and drugs, something which of course has been regularly reported on and was laid bare in the ongoing defamation trial. Getting to the root of what's behind this and how this impacts upon his characteristics and behaviours is fundamental to gaining an understanding as to the type of individual that he is. Narcissists invariably, but not always, have issues with regard to alcohol and drugs. They'll also have issues, for instance, also with food, with gambling, with spending. But with regard to alcohol and drugs, narcissists often have issues with these matters because they're fuel substitutes. If you'd like to understand more about that, watch Cheers, The Narcissist and Alcohol. Also, of course, narcissists have a sense of entitlement to engage in behaviours which others would regard as risky, to finances, to health, to relationships. But the narcissist, having no emotional empathy, no sense of remorse or guilt or conscience, will engage in extensive drug taking and getting drunk. I emphasise not all narcissists will do this, but often it's present. In certain instances, the narcissist behaves this way because of no sense of accountability for the behaviours. They don't care, for instance, that the drug taking is criminal. They don't care for the fact that they turn up late for an appointment because they're shaking off a hangover. They don't care about the fact that they might be turning up inebriated or high. The behaviours associated with excessive alcohol intake and drug use also can manifest an absence of emotional empathy, demonstrated by not caring about the impact these behaviours have upon those around the narcissist. People affected by failure to undertake work, people affected by the failure to regulate finances, because drug habits can be particularly expensive. A failure with regard to the consequential behaviour that arises from being under the influence of drugs and alcohol, in terms of physical violence, damage to property, insults, repeated infidelities, and so forth. The central aspects of the narcissist with regard to their need to assert control and operating through a sense of entitlement, lack of emotional empathy, and an absence of accountability lends itself to repeated instances of alcohol and drug abuse. Let us continue, with all of that stated, the examination of Johnny Depp. Depp's issues with alcohol and drug use are well reported, and they repeatedly arose during the recent trial. His alcohol and drug use must be considered with regard to establishing whether he is an empath, normal, narcissistic, or a narcissist. Such issues can be a manifestation of fuel substitution, demonstrative, as I've explained, as a sense of entitlement, an absence of emotional empathy, a failure to show accountability, and in some instances even a form of manipulation. They may instead be responsible for the erosion of emotional empathy, resulting in poor behaviour. So the individual is not a narcissist, but they still have addiction issues, and it's the addiction issues which erode emotional empathy, causing poor behaviour towards others and self-destructive behaviours. They can also be a consequence of a response by an individual to having experienced trauma as a means by way of a coping mechanism. Depp stated, "It has been well reported and I have been open about my challenges with alcoholism and addiction throughout my life. In fact, I started drinking and taking drugs when I was still a child. I am not in any way embarrassed to say this." Is this a sense of entitlement and lack of accountability to say, hey, I take drugs and I drink and I don't really care what you think about me? Or is it simply, I'm admitting that I have issues, and if you judge me for it, well, I'm not bothered about that because I'm telling you this is what I am. Depp has had more than his share of well-documented struggles with substance abuse, which often makes him cannon fodder for the tabloids. One of the things that Depp was questioned about when he took the witness stand in his own defence was about how he found drugs and alcohol early in life. He explained, "My mother used to ask me to go and get her nerve pills, and I think I was around the age of 11 that it dawned on me that nerve pills were calming her nerves. So I brought her nerve pills, and I took one, and that began my drug use." At 11 years old, does that show a lack of boundary recognition and asset appropriation by taking something that belongs to somebody else? Or is it simple curiosity? Or is it the fact that he recognises that he felt a nervousness and wanted to do something about it? There's the fact that his mother evidently had nerve issues, i.e. anxiety. This is significant because, like addictive disorders, anxiety and other mental illnesses tend to run in families. To deal with emotional pain of clinical anxiety, sufferers abuse substances at a much higher rate than the general population. This is borne out in Depp's own words, when he said that his early alcohol and drug use was the only way that I found to numb the pain. Secondly, the most common nerve pills when Depp was a child were barbiturates such as Luminal or the then newer benzodiazepines Librium or Valium. But tranquilizers like barbiturates or benzos are extremely habit-forming, even when taken exactly as directed. In fact, dependence can develop in a matter of weeks, easily paving the way for abuse and addiction. Third, and perhaps most influential in Depp's individual case, is the fact that he started misusing his mother's prescription medication when he was only 11 years old. It is the case that at that prepubescent age, the human brain is still developing, and it's particularly vulnerable to the effects of mind-altering substances. Therefore, in a very obvious way, Depp the boy contributed to the later struggles with addiction faced by Depp the man. I understand that this is because early substance use triggers changes that prime the brain for more alcohol and drugs. For example, a child who drinks before the age of 15 is 6 times more likely to develop an alcohol use disorder at some point than one who waits until the age 21 or older. Likewise, teenagers who use marijuana before they turn 18 are 4 to 7 times more likely to develop a cannabis use disorder. Therefore, Depp's early start primed him for the potential of it being a considerable issue for him as an adult. Depp stated, I was poisoning myself beyond belief. There was a lot of liquor. I was pretty unhealthy. Depp's early experimentation led to ongoing issues as an adult. In a 1997 interview, he admitted to drinking heavily, and he was also evasive when he was asked if he also used heroin. The problem continued because, in Depp's own words, when he was interviewed for Playboy in 2004, he said, I was poisoning myself with alcohol and medicating myself. I was trying not to feel things, and that's ridiculous. When he was interviewed by Rolling Stone in 2005, Depp also stated, I spent years poisoning myself. I was very, very good at it. Are these repeated behaviours where he realises what he's doing but won't do anything about it the manifestation of an absence of accountability? Or is this simply the case of an addict who just doesn't know what to do? It's revealing that Depp kept using the phrase, poisoning myself. Could this be seen as a pity play? Or it might be the case that it demonstrates that he was fully aware that his behaviour was self-destructive, but he was quite simply unable to stop. That, of course, is a primary symptom of full-blown addiction. Depp revealed that he didn't drink for fun. He said, I never had that. It was never about recreation. Not ever. That wasn't my motivation. Depp stated, I never wanted to be the guy people looked at. I felt I could only be myself when I was alone, that I turned into some kind of novelty. The only way I could get through that time was to drink. Again, is that statement a pity play being issued by him, obviating any accountability for the behaviours that he's engaging in? Or is it quite simply a manifestation of a deep-seated issue that he has and that he utilises alcohol to get him through that? Depp believes that the pressures of celebrity are to blame. Might that be seen as blame shifting? The constant scrutiny, the lack of privacy and actual personal life, the need to maintain the illusion of perfection, and the incessant demands to perform can take their toll upon certain individuals. Chronic stress does contribute to increased substance abuse. According to a recent study published in Neuron, acute stress changes the brain on a neurological level, prompting the person to drink more alcohol. Researchers have discovered that the neurons within the brain's reward center, responsible for regulating alcohol intake, flip after exposure to severe stress, and as a result, the brain incentivizes heavier drinking. The current theory is that this ability of the reward neurons to switch off and on is an evolved biological trait that allows humans to overcome physical injury or trauma faster. This backs up the accepted disease concept of addiction. It also highlights the biological reason why some people, like Depp, feel the need to self-medicate with drugs and alcohol when they feel overly stressed. Now, Depp doesn't appear to be an individual that suffers from stress. He comes across as a quite sort of laid-back and laconic person. But that stated, of course, one doesn't necessarily know what's going on under the surface. We know that he suffered extensive childhood trauma, and if he finds the price of fame too great, that will create its own stressors, which may cause him to feel the need to self-medicate. Depp also stated, "I was as low as I believe I could have gotten. The next step for me was, you're going to arrive somewhere with your eyes open, and you're going to leave there with your eyes closed. I couldn't take the pain every day." Is this the candid admission of an individual that is suffering as a consequence of his addictions? Or, once again, could it potentially be a pity play where his narcissism blame shifts and utilizes these instances as a means to assert control over people? As I mentioned earlier, back in 2014, Depp was officially diagnosed with primary dopamine imbalance, clinical depression, ADHD, and chronic substance use disorder. Individually, each of these conditions increases the likelihood of substance abuse, but taken together, it becomes an almost certainty. The dopamine imbalance is particularly relevant. Whenever somebody performs an activity necessary to survival, such as eating or sex, their brain releases dopamine, a naturally occurring neurotransmitter associated with reward, pleasure, learning, and motivation. When the action is performed, that person is rewarded with a flood of dopamine that causes pleasure. Over time, they learn to repeat the action because the pleasurable reward is their motivation. However, over time and with repeated use, this artificial overstimulation disrupts the brain's normal reward system. The dopamine response to the substance is reduced, meaning it takes increasing amounts to achieve the same pleasurable effects. This is what becomes as tolerance. Eventually, however, dopamine receptors become fatigued or burned out from overuse, so the brain shuts down the natural production of dopamine. As a result, the tolerant person is unable to feel pleasure or motivation unless they are actively drinking or drugging, and therefore it can leave them in a position of not being able to function, and that creates a dependency. When the substance isn't available, or they try to quit using, they experience very harsh, very unpleasant symptoms of withdrawal. It's unclear if Depp's dopamine imbalance was before his substance abuse issues or if decades of abuse have caused that imbalance. But it's evident that the condition that he has would cause him to look for relief anywhere he could find it, and in terms of doing so, through alcohol and drug use. Depp went on to say, "I poured myself a vodka in the morning and started writing until the tears filled my eyes. I kept trying to figure out what I'd done to deserve this." Again, are these the words of someone in the grip of a genuine addiction? Or do they sit alongside a pity play issued by an individual that is manipulating, consciously or unconsciously, by triangulating people with the actual condition? Depp's known for abusing opioids. In addition to the possibility of heroin in the 1990s, he's admitted to being quite addicted to oxycodone following a stunt injury suffered while making a film in London. Depp's particular drugs of choice, opioids and alcohol, made him particularly vulnerable to depression. Substance abuses also cause sufferers to engage in self-destructive and dysfunctional behaviours that can trigger negative consequences and worsen depression. It would appear that Depp, from what Dr. Kipper diagnosed, is experiencing all of these and more. Might those be the primary reasons for the behaviours that he engages in? Or is it the case that these sit alongside something else, and they sit alongside narcissism, and his narcissism capitalises on these factors for the purposes of acting without accountability, asserting control over individuals, and behaving generally in a way which is unpleasant to others? The drugs aspect of Johnny Depp tells us much, and the detail that I provided to you certainly sets up a suggestion that much of his behaviours have been governed by the problems that he has with alcohol and drugs. This still calls into question, is it a case that he has an addiction that he's unable to deal with without proper help? Or is it the case that his narcissism, if he is as such, has no sense of accountability, and therefore he doesn't make any genuine effort to remain clean for a protracted period of time? Remember, there are people who have been through addictions and they get clean, they stay sober, and they maintain it for years, demonstrating accountability, demonstrating that they don't have an innate sense of entitlement, demonstrating that they have emotional empathy for others. Of course, when they were in the grip of the addiction, they operated with a sense of entitlement. They didn't show accountability. They will have been manipulative and conniving. They will also have failed to exhibit emotional empathy towards others because it's eroded by the grip of the addiction. But then by staying clean, by staying sober, they have tackled their addiction. It doesn't go away, but they've reached deep within themselves, it would appear, and demonstrated the presence of those traits to help them stay clear of drugs and alcohol. Might it be the case that Depp's repeated failures are as a consequence of his narcissism, which means that he doesn't attempt to do anything for anything other than appearance's sake? Or is it the case that he is in the grip of particularly difficult addictions, with all the multiplicity of factors that I've just mentioned, making it especially difficult for him to stay sober and to stay clean? Bear in mind also that certain external stresses, such as an abusive relationship, might also impact upon him, causing him to reach for the alcohol and the drugs as a means of numbing the pain that he's experiencing. Or is it the case that a perceived abusive relationship is simply threatening his sense of control, and he uses the drink and the drugs as an excuse? We will have to look at all of this information in the round, but certainly this examination of the position with regard to his use of drugs and alcohol is particularly instructive.